Hey, welcome to Truth and Reality. I'm Ashley. So glad that you're here. This podcast is dedicated to just that, talking about the ups, the downs, the in-betweens of life, and how God and faith fits into all of it. Melissa is back again for more waiting.
In the studio, not just on a screen, and I can't wait to talk more. We've had some really great discussions.
We have. We've talked about waiting. We've talked about the struggle with waiting and the hard parts of waiting. We've talked about what does rest look like in the waiting and trusting God and entwining our hearts with God.
Yep.
And we are going to then move the conversation and talk about how do we wait well? Like, we know it's hard. We're human. We're imperfect. We're going to have these moments. And we've both lived this, waiting for different seasons where that doubt comes up or fear or like, did God really say? When God gives you a promise, that original thing that the enemy says is, did God really say? And so there are a lot of things in our lives that we're still waiting on. And there are things that God has done and accomplished and shown his faithfulness in. So we just want to open that up and share our own experience about how do we wait well. So what do you, Melissa, have to say about when you're in a waiting season and God has promised something and you're waiting and that doubt pops up? Or all those thoughts, because we all have the thoughts that come. Yeah. Just because you have faith doesn't mean you're not going to hear doubt. It's what we do with it that matters.
True. And I don't feel like I need to say this, but I do. I have been saved for a really long time, and I still struggle with waiting and still struggle with doubt and still struggle with, questioning, God, are you here or in the midst of it? And so I think how we wait well is multiple facets. I think one thing that's really helped me is a lot of the waiting, I grow restless in my mind, and I question, God, are you in it? I question, God, did you really tell me that? God, did you really say you were going to do that? You and I talked, just recently, and I really prayed. My prayer this year was that my God, God, what is it for my kids that you want? And he said, pray that they would heal so that they can hope and love again. And I questioned, like, is that what you really want me to do? And I think I had to physically write down what the things that he spoke to me. Like, God, I thank you that you're healing my kids. And God, I thank you that, you're restoring hope in them again. And I think so many times our mind can get ahead, and it's like, how do we wait well, and I think there's multiple things. I think that's one of them for me, is just writing down what it is and not growing impatient. And I think sometimes my agenda gets ahead of God's agenda, and a daily surrender. And sometimes it's even just opening my hands and say, God, I trust you with my life. I trust you with my kids' life. I trust you with my future. Because so many times I'm like, it's taking so long. You and I have talked, like, I was like, I did not think I would be here. Yet I've seen his faithfulness and I've seen his goodness. Are there still areas that I'm like, are you kidding me? It's taking so long. Yes.
Real life.
100%. That's a whole nother conversation for another time. I have grown weary, but I have also learned right now to rest and to trust him, and how to do it well. It's like surrendering it to him and just saying, God, you know what? You're in it. You've entrusted me. I'm strong enough, even though I question my own strength, and know that you are going to help me and sustain me and in that. So how about for you?
Well, I like that you said that, because you do. We chat a lot and we talk back and forth. And the thing I appreciate about you is that you continually say to me, and I'm learning from you, that you're like, I'm feeling weary. And I just said, God, you can have my weariness. Like, come into my weariness and strengthen me.
Yep.
So I think that what I hear you doing is you're identifying, this is how I feel. This is the reality of what's going on for me.
Yep.
But I also know you're my strength. You said that. And so whether or not you have that strong faith belief that, whether you're strong or not, you're saying, okay, God, I need your strength.
Yep.
And that position of exchange, have my weariness, bring me your strength.
Yep.
Right? And then over time, that verbiage, you're saying it out loud too.
Yeah.
And like when you call me, you'll say it out loud. I think that's the renewing your mind. You're taking captive the thoughts. Because we're all going to have seasons of weariness, seasons of tired. Like, depending on the circumstances in our life, we're human. Like, we go through that. But I love how you say that. You write it down. You write the truths God told you down. And then you also state the truth. Like, here's the reality, but this is your truth. So they can coexist, which is which is the whole element of this podcast, is that reality and truth can coexist.
Yep.
And even though you feel weary, it doesn't mean God's not your strength, right? And so what does that look like? And so I love that you just say it. You're like, I'm weary and strengthen me.
But if you think about even Melissa, and I'll point out my flaws, because I think we need to be transparent and real. 2 years ago or even 3 years ago, I would call her and say, I have hit a wall. Like, I am spiraling. I am broken. I can't do this anymore. And you would help me reframe it. We'd pray, and you'd be like, Melissa, it doesn't appear that you're like hitting a wall. I'm like, no, I am done.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead, I'm using even different words and even different confessions of saying, I'll call you and be like, I'm feeling weary. Okay, but I know it's going to get better, So I think the power of our words is so careful and so, important on the journey of just being careful how we phrase things.
Yeah.
Well,
and I love how you said you bring it to God, and then you also call a friend. Phone a friend, like, I need some help.
Right.
Or we both see a life coach that we're like, hey, I need help. So it's not like we're not meant to do life alone. So that's also a way to do it. We're bringing it to God over and over. We're reminding ourselves of truth. And then we're also in community, because when you're isolated, it's really hard to keep moving forward. God didn't make us for isolation. He built us for community, 100%. Just like him. I want to take a pause and back up a second, because you said, I wrote down what God told me he wanted for my kids. So some people might be listening to this being like, oh my gosh, God said something to you? Right. How do you hear that?
Right.
What does that look like? And we do have other podcasts on hearing the voice of God. But, what would that look like? What is somebody, when God speaks to you, how does he speak to you? There's multiple ways, but when you said you asked him about your kids for this year, what does that look like?
I think it's really just taking time to be quiet. Like we said, not even necessarily a season of rest. I take time in the morning, or whether it's a car ride, and just turning off the distractions and be like, God, what do you want for my life? And being quiet, which is really hard. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes there's not always a direct answer right away. Sometimes it comes in, they're playing at a park, and I'm looking at them and realizing how big they're getting, and the Lord's like, pray that their lives will be full of hope and full of joy. And sometimes it's even a vision, or I'll have a dream about them older. And so I think it's taking a moment, which is really hard, to be quiet and say, God, what would you have for me with these kids? Because I think I've been really transparent with you. I was like, after Matt died, I was like, I can't do this, God. I'm not strong enough. I'm not capable. This isn't the way it was supposed to be. And he so gently, in such a quiet voice, just said, you are strong enough. And I knew you were going to be here. And I knew you were capable. So I think even for those prayers for our kids, or whatever that situation is, I think it's getting us quiet and listening. And even if you hear nothing, he's still speaking. Yeah. Right? And it may just not be in that moment. I think I intentionally try and take times to pause and be quiet, to hear him. Even that reassurance, it almost sounds like a father's voice of like, I've got them, Melissa. Because I think I've told you this so many times. I didn't want my kids' opening line to be like, my dad died. Right? My mom and dad divorced. My mom's a widow. I wanted them to have their hope restored and become more than that narrative, whatever it is that was ours. And so I think being intentional and quiet our minds and quiet our voices to hear that.
And again, that falls into, we need rest physically, our calendar, to hear God. God can speak anytime. I mean, he's spoken to me in a room of 3,000 people, and he's also spoken to me journaling in my bed at night. But the point is getting yourself to a space where you're available to say, okay, God, because there are so many distractions in life. There's so many things. I love how you stopped and you said, God, what do you want for my life? And I think in a waiting season, for me anyways, it took me saying, I am frustrated and I'm mad and frustrated with the waiting, to get to a place, not that I've arrived anywhere, to be like, okay, I can't will this to go any faster, so what do you want, God? And I did a little sassy that at first.
I think you can handle the sassy, let me tell you.
And now I'm like, okay, God, what do you want? Because I have seen your faithfulness now, and so now I'm like, okay, what do you want for me? Because your plans are greater than mine. And it's interesting because it took me, I had to struggle with the wait. I had to get mad. I had to say, God, I'm mad with this. And then he reframes my thoughts and my heart as you do that entwining, right, with him. And then I'm like, oh, okay, you're showing me you're good. Oh, you're showing me these elements. And walking towards healing to be like in this waiting season, okay, I can't push this. My agenda's laid down now. What's your agenda? I think that's beautiful because I want to read Psalm 139. And I just said, I read Psalm 139 all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I reference it all the time. It says, you know all about me. And I won't read the whole thing, but it's talking about how God formed your innermost being and he knit you together, shaping your delicate inside and intricate outside. And you were woven together. You're not a mistake.
No.
Even you and I being in the season we're in, God knew you'd be here.
Yep.
He knew. He knows the end from the beginning.
Correct. Yep. He's not surprised.
No.
Right? That there's a struggle, that there's tension, that you're walking through that hard place. He's not surprised by it.
Mm-hmm.
He gives us the grace and the strength to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It says, how thoroughly you know me, Lord. You formed every bone in my body when you created me in the secret place. Then it goes down and it says, you saw who you created me to be before I became to be. Before I'd ever seen the light of day, the number of my days you planned for me were already recorded in your book. And that part for me in a waiting season is like God goes before you.
Yep.
Like every day has been written.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm starting to cry right now. Every day's been written.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to walk out the plans and call that God has on our
Yes.
life, even in these hard seasons of waiting, knowing God's already written. And even though he doesn't cause the hard things we walk through,
Yep.
he helps us navigate through them.
Yeah.
My son had a beautiful vision of God, actually. When we first moved into this house, it was such a season of transition. I sat with one of my kids and said, God, where are you? Will you show this child of mine where you are? It was so beautiful, the picture that he gave him. Now, my kids were new to being like, oh, God can give you pictures in your mind or little movies or visions. He can speak to you that way. Like he created your imagination. That's what a vision is.
Mm-hmm.
If you can picture, I always say this to them, if you can picture the kitchen table and we're downstairs or outside, you can get a vision from God. And so one night we sat there and we said, God, where are you? And he closed his eyes and we're just sitting there praying. And he goes, Mom, I saw a lion. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And he said, well, he's up on a rock. And I was like, well, what does that look like? And he explained, like Lion King, Pride Rock, like what is like a lion.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, well, tell me more. And he goes, but I'm on the ground and there's this giant tall grass maze and I don't know where to go. And he said, but there's a giant light that the lion's holding shining down on the maze. And I was like, cool. And I was like, did you see anything else? And he goes, well, there's a lion next to me and one ahead of me. And I go, what? And he goes, yeah, so the light's shining on the one ahead of me, navigating through the maze, and the one next to me is saying, turn, go here. And I was like,
wow.
that was like 2 minutes, right, that we sat there and prayed. And I said, what do you think that means?
Yeah.
Let's ask God, because I don't want to interpret his dream.
Yep.
And he goes, well, God's 3 parts, because he's old enough to understand that now. And
Yep.
he's like, so I think that's God shining down the light on the maze. And then I think, God with you is the Holy Spirit, and Jesus, you follow Jesus and you become like Jesus, right? That's the whole goal. And I was like, oh, it's like, it's a beautiful picture. And then as I journaled about that later, I felt like it was even went farther with this Psalm 139, all my days are ordered.
Yeah.
Like the maze of my kid's life,
Yeah.
God created the maze.
Our lives, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Of our
Yeah.
lives. And so he's shining the path on what he already created. And then Jesus and the Holy Spirit are like navigating, and here comes a hard situation with a friend, and here
Yep.
comes a hard situation in your life, and navigating through, but it's already been mapped. And that like made me go, what?
Right.
And so the beautiful thing that I'm learning, and I'm trying to step into and navigate in waiting seasons,
Yep.
is saying, God, what are your plans for me?
Mm-hmm.
And sitting and saying, what do you have for my life? How do you want me to live out who I am?
Yep.
And so the waiting season became less about waiting for time to pass
Yep.
and waiting on God and being like, if you have promised me a job or I'm building a nonprofit, what do you want to do in me? So when I get to the nonprofit stage
Yep.
that you want, that's built in me, that I'm refined,
Yep.
that I'm built up in the knowledge or the
Yep.
connections or the people that I know to be able to do it, or even the skill set to be able to record a video or whatnot. So what do you need to do in me? If I'm waiting for a future spouse, right? What do you want to create and build and shape me to be the wife that you want me to be
Correct.
when that happens?
Yep.
So instead of waiting and grudgingly which I've done that too.
Yes.
I'm waiting, being like, okay, this is an equipping season.
Yeah, because you and I have talked, there's only certain things you'll learn in the waiting that you'll look back and it's like, God's like, I'm trying to show you something. I even like what you said, like your son, it was like those certain parts shine bright. And I feel like even in my own life, it's like areas that I've questioned, God, are you in it? It helps me reframe a prayer of like, God, shine light. Show me direction. Show me a step. Show me something that you're in it. I've seen my kids so beautifully heal and restore and dream again. I think grief steals that ability from you of dreaming and hoping. And I've seen God's light shine bright, even in that, so it's beautiful to see. I love that illustration.
Yeah. Not that I have another story, but I have
Tell
another
me.
story.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to kind of close talking about the faithfulness of God, talking about sometime in the waiting seasons, you have to remind yourself over and over and over about the faithfulness of God. Joshua did this in the Bible. When they crossed the Jordan River on dry ground, he told each head of the tribes to pick up a rock out of the middle of the riverbed that they walked across on dry ground so they could set it up as a monument to remind them of the faithfulness of God. And I think we practically need to do that in our own lives. We need to write it down. We need to post it. We need to take a picture of whatever that is and have it there and to remind us of God's faithfulness. I was at a retreat and I was out for a walk, but there were a lot of flies, and so it made it turn into a run because deer flies. And I started running, and I am not a runner, but I started running, and in this run, I all of a sudden I was also listening to music and just broke out in tears, and I was like, what is happening? Yeah. Also, not a huge crier. So that's so interesting. Yeah. And I want to read to you what I felt like. So I was running. I was seeking God on this transition. I'm in a big transition. I'm starting a new job. Just a big transition in life, which is exciting and all positive things. But transitions are hard. There's a lot of unknowns. And so I was just out for a run. And again, this is like not like I have tears running down my eyes. It was like an uncontrollable sob. So I was so glad I was out in the middle of nowhere by myself.
See you.
Where no one could see me. And I felt like what God said was, and this is my literal little journal notes. So he said, this is a washing of tears over it all for the last time, but with my perspective of faithfulness, with God's faithfulness. So I wrote, he did it, even when I questioned him, even when I wasn't certain, even when I stepped out with only this teeny bit of faith, he did it. Not despite me, but for me, because I couldn't. So as I was running, these were tears of gratitude, and it almost felt like faith building, like a rooting. He did it. God's track record in the Bible was good, but now I had seen God's faithfulness in my personal life, and his track record was good. It wasn't what I thought he would do, but it was more complete than I thought it could be. And I think that's what hit me, where if he would have done what I thought, I have no clue. It was not a good idea, what I was thinking. So what God's plans and purposes are far greater. And I was like, I would have never imagined, but it was way more complete than I thought. And as I was running, you guys, I like thinking in movies, but it started raining and it was just downpouring. And I was like, oh my gosh, it just felt super cleansing. And I felt the Lord say, and when he talks to me, sometimes he talks in a thought. Yep. So it just comes across like this. No more questioning me. I've proven faithful to you. Now you see it and know I won't leave you. I won't stop loving you. I won't stop pursuing you. I won't stop pulling you forward to the more I have. This is a transition. Fully walking and knowing that I love you completely. There's nothing I won't do for you. And I felt like he said transition. And it was a choice. I had the choice. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times in waiting seasons, I stand with one foot on one side of the line and one on the other, saying, okay, I'll believe you when.
You, or if you do this, and I'll trust you. God, show me that, and then I'll trust you.
Yeah. And I felt like he said, he graciously, he wants us to trust him. He showed me the track record. I saw so many things full circle of my personal healing with my kids, lining up this amazing job that I had actually started with a long time ago that I have back now in just these relationships, in this flourishing of relationship with God, that he just developed joy in me, even though my circumstance is the same.
I was just going to say.
Isn't that interesting? So it was so interesting. And he's like, I'm faithful.
Yep.
Now you know it.
Yep.
And so he was like, transition, take that next step.
Yep.
Even though you don't know what's coming, even though you don't know the unknown. There's a lot of things. Well, none of us know the future.
Yeah.
Right? But he's like, trust me. I'm not trusting that I'm going to do X, Y, Z, or this job's going to come, but I'm trusting God.
Yep.
That he's with me, that his plans are good, that he'll help me navigate it, even when it's hard. Even if I walk through a messy situation in my marriage and walk through divorce, God was in it, and he did it. I didn't think he could do it, and he still did it. And he did it despite my doubt and despite the faith. I mean, there was both throughout it. He did it. And that was the thing, is like, I'm faithful. That was the comment that I landed on that weekend. God's like, I'm faithful, Ashley. I will do what I say.
That's beautiful. I think probably there's so many people probably listening too that maybe be in a season of waiting and a season of transition. And it's like, I think what you're speaking speaks to them of like, hold on to hope. Don't grow weary. Find rest in your waiting. God's in the waiting, and it's like, we've seen him in a dimension of our lives. I would never wish, upon anyone what happened in my life or happened to you. Yet I saw God in a different way than I thought, right? And I saw healing happen, and I saw our hope restored. And so I think we have to trust him in the process, even when we don't see him, that he is good. There's good for us, and there's good for our kids, and the outcome, whatever you're walking through. And I think that's so beautiful, is trusting him. Is challenging, but I think there's such a beautiful fruit, a beautiful reward that we see when we do trust him.
That's good. Well, thanks for chatting about waiting and rest and trust.
Yes.
You can find us at Peace Runs Deep. We're so glad that you joined us today.